Welcome. Welcome. How's it going, man?
It's going good, man. It's great to catch up again after what seems like quite a while, which is quite a while, I think. So
Well, you listen, man. I'm a big fan of you and the work that you're doing. I'm a big fan of anyone who is focused on improving the leadership in our companies, improving teams. I'm grateful for your service and who you are. I'm glad people like you exist that are so passionate and dedicated to something in life. I'm also a fan of your hair, your most recent hair here.
yeah, at a certain point, I probably got to get that trimmed up a little bit, but uh, the chicks seem to dig it, and by chicks, I mean my wife and my mother-in-law. So.
I think it's beautiful, man. Well, will you tell folks who you are and what you do, a little bit about it?
Yeah, so Steve Drum, I go by Steve or Steven. I wasn't I kind of botched my whole branding in the beginning when I left the military, but I retired from the Navy in 2019 after 27 years. I finished as a Navy SEAL, right, as a senior leader in the SEAL teams. And before I got out, one of the last things I got to work on, I was fortunate to be invited to contribute, or it was help build this program. Literally, I got an admiral took me. A chaplain and a Navy clinical psychologist locked us in a room together and said, "Hey, we need you all to figure out how to develop a program to make our sailors and young officers tougher, and more resilient in the face of combat situations and the stresses of military life." And so I was able to do that. And through that design, I was able to take that, my experiences, the things that I learned from people, the things that I wish I had learned, and translate that into the world of business and speaking. And so that's what I do, workshops and keynotes and things like that. And so it's been a fun journey.
All the SEALs I see are like these very intense people. How did you decide that you wanted to become a SEAL?
Yeah, so I think as a young lad, grew up on the East Coast in Pennsylvania, in the mean streets of the suburbs of Philadelphia. And by mean streets, I'm joking. It was, kind of a semi-rural place. And I was a mediocre at best athlete. But at some point, I always kind of had a connection with military service. I looked up to the Vietnam vets, especially the Green Berets, the Special Forces guys who were doing they're really hanging it out there, doing the most dangerous, secretive stuff in Vietnam. And I was like, these guys, I really looked up to them. And I'd always kind of planned on joining the Army probably at some point. I thought I'd maybe go to college first and get my degree and then try to get a commission and be an officer. And I had an uncle, in fact, his helmet is behind me on the shelf right there. People always like, "Is that a Star Wars helmet?" I'm like, "No, it's my uncle's aviation helmet." But he spent a lot of time in the Navy as a pilot, and he really was like, "Hey, the Navy has special operations forces too. They're called SEALs." And so he encouraged me. He actually took me down. We drove from Pennsylvania down to Little Creek, Virginia, and I got to meet some SEALs and got to see a little bit behind the curtain there. And I'm like, I want to do this. This is what I want to do, and I don't want to waste time going to college. I want to do it right out of high school. And so that's what I did.
What did you see? Like, what was the part that attracted you?
I think largely, it's the little kid fantasy of playing war, right? You don't really know what real combat's like, so you just know by the movies and painting your
GI
face
Joes.
green. Yeah, painting your face green and crawling around and all that cool stuff. And and then there's the personal sense, like, right, I had a chip on my shoulder to some extent. I had something to prove to myself, right? And I had to prove that I could do what I read was the hardest military training out there. And so I was like, if I can do that, it'll be something, a really great accomplishment. And so that's really got me in the door.
I think one thing people talk about is how difficult the training is to even become a SEAL. I wonder what you think about how becoming a SEAL has changed you.
Yeah, it's so funny because the reasons that I just described for wanting to go into the SEAL teams were not necessarily the reasons that kept me there, right? Because as you said, it's hard training, the attrition rate anywhere from 75 to 90%, and 75 to 90% won't make it. And you got to find a really good reason to stick with it. And the main reason for me, and the same reason why I stuck around for 27 years, it was about the people I was surrounded with. I looked around and the people to the left and right of me are like, these are the best people I've ever kind of had a chance to kind of rub elbows and work with. And I'm like, I feel like I found a family here. I found a place of belonging, and I want more of this. I want to see where this journey is going to take me. And so, that's really what it was all about. And I think in terms of,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say in terms of what it changed. I mean, the military in general, like I always say, hey, if you really are not sure what you want to do in life, especially as a young, immature man, young man, kid, the military will provide you the rudimentary structure of discipline and organization and structure to really get you kind of moving out in a direction that's productive. And I think the SEAL teams, they do that at a very high, exceptional level. And so you're constantly just bettering yourself. You're constantly competing with the people around you to be better. So, yeah.
You said you had this kid view coming in of going to war, and how did your view on combat change actually being in it?
Well, everybody's, all experiences are kind of different. I think that, relating to my combat experience, there was fear, there was a lot of busyness, and there's a lot of times that it wasn't as busy. You wish you were more productive. Generally speaking, though, my experience was not that of some of the people that I know, some of the people that have had friends die in front of them. And I didn't have that happen to me. And so there's a huge difference there. So I enjoyed it. I had fun. I mean, it's what we SEALs really like to do. We like to go out there and kick doors in, right, and get after the enemy. Now, there were moments where, I didn't think I was going to make it out of situations alive, and that's a different feeling. Being on the receiving end as opposed to the giving end is definitely a different feeling. But at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, I can't find something else I'd rather do. I liked it, and I said I'd stick with it as long as that was fun. Getting after that, and it's everything. It's all the pre-deployment training. You're competing against the people, your other teammates, right? Constantly trying to make sure that you're bettering your reputation as an operator, and then later in my career as a leader, to maintain credibility and be effective. But yeah, I liked it. I liked my time. But again, that was my experience.
It seems like preparedness and developing skills becomes ultra important when the stakes are life and death.
Well, it is. So, and one of the things I always talk about is the importance of being brilliant on the basics, right? Which is your ability, in the SEAL teams, it's my pursuit of mastery of some of the most fundamental aspects of my craft in terms of weapons handling, in terms of tactics, in terms of the equipment that we need to use and the communication with air support and things like that. Drilling those things over and over and over again until you can perform them reflexively. And once you can do that, well, now we've got to see if you can do it in the clutch. So now we have to put it in scenario-based training where we start to step up the stimulus, step up the stress, the challenge, to start to kind of inoculate you from that stress for the real thing. Because when the bullets are flying, you can't be thinking about how to do tactics and how to use your equipment. You can only be focused on trying to stay a step ahead of the enemy. And that totally translates to everything we do in life, right? I mean, you want to have 3 to 5 things in your life that you want to attempt mastery at. So when you're doing something, you're doing the most important work that you're doing. Maybe it's the most stressful period. Maybe it's you as a parent, as a spouse, a partner, being fully engaged, able to think critically, able to make sure the best things come out of your mouth and you behave in the right way. That's about not just developing the skills, but developing the attributes as well as developing the mental game and the emotional regulation to perform in situations like that.
Well, it sounds like you have to develop a muscle memory or an ability to act without thinking to be prepared to be successful in these super high pressure, high stakes environments. And that can translate to mastery in roles outside of the military, like you were saying.
Well, I'll put it to you like this. Okay. So say, for example, a combat operation, right? Kind of stick with me, right? As I try to to crudely connect this, right? Think of that cop, all the decisions, the tactics, the choices as represented on, say, like a large menu on like one of those, like an Italian restaurant menu, those really long ones. Every option that you pull off, every menu item, once you pull it off the menu, you can execute it reflectively, like in your sleep, right? The problem is that you have to have the presence of mind, the emotional control and regulation to read the situation properly and pull the right menu item off and use that. And so, for example, another, I'll use is primarily if I go into a room, if I go into a room clinch, like close quarter combat, as we call it, and I have my primary assault rifle and I'm engaging the enemy, and all of a sudden my primary says no, either it jams or I run out of ammo, I know instinctively to transition to my pistol, right, and engage the threats. Now all of a sudden, if I take that same scenario and now I'm all out on the streets fighting an enemy who's probably like 100 meters away or something, it does me really no good to go to my pistol. So at that point, I need to take cover, get my primary weapon system online, and re-engage that way. And so, but all of that happens very, very quickly. I just need to make sure that I'm in the driver's seat emotionally to make that right choice. Once I engage with that choice, then it happens instinctively.
What made you decide to, 27 years is a long time to be in the Navy. What made you decide to leave?
Well, I could have done as much as 30 years, and it works in the military. I assume it's the same for the other branches. I retired as the highest rank as the enlisted guy, right? I was an enlisted. So the rank was E9 Master Chief, which would be like a sergeant major in the Marine Corps or the Army. And if I had gone to work for a general or admiral, then I could have stayed on past 30 to serve at that really high level. But 30, I would have topped out. I left, Virginia Beach, where I spent most of my career, and went up to Great Lakes to teach the Navy's boot camp. And that's where I did that for a while, running a program to get people into the SEAL teams, and then created that Warrior Toughness program. And at this point, I was like, I just, I didn't feel like doing the next rung. The next rung would have been for me to do what's called an operations master chief, where I'd just been doing a lot of administrative and logistics before I fleeted up into what's called a command master chief. And I was just like, you know what? This is just a good time for me to get off the train. It felt right. And maybe part of me is like, maybe it would have been cool to have been a command master chief, but I just felt like my heart was no longer in it. I liked the action stuff. I just didn't want to sit in a command office. It just wasn't for me at the time.
It seems like your transition maybe wasn't as abrupt as some, but how was that transition moving from military to civilian for you?
Well, it wasn't as bad, again, because the thing is, if I had retired in Virginia Beach, and I'm going to work every day, I'm in that community, and then one day I just wake up and I'm like, I'm not going to the teams anymore. That would have been kind of weird for me. I think leaving the SEAL teams, I was still filling the role of a SEAL. I was still in a SEAL job at the Navy's boot camp, but I had to adapt to a completely different culture. Like, I didn't have much experience working with the regular Navy throughout my career, mostly with kind of Army, Marine Corps, and we did a little bit of stuff with the Navy, but a lot of that joint environment. But I had to learn that culture. I had to learn to adapt to that culture. I had to learn how to kind of put my experiencing aside, open my ears, be humble in my approach. And those are the same things I try to pass along to the guys, the SEALs that work for me up there, is like, hey, this is an opportunity. Like, you're going to leave and you're going to have to adapt to a completely different culture. You can't act the way you did in the SEAL teams. You've got to adjust. And so this is an opportunity for you to take advantage of that. And I think I did that fairly successfully.
This may be a weird question, but was it lonely leaving the military?
Yeah, I definitely, it's something that I struggled with a little bit, and I think especially when COVID, and this is not unique to me, it's like you miss the guys to talk to, right? You miss, like, I think one of the things that also, like, it's a double-edged sword. I think one of the things I made sure I developed a lot of friendships outside of the military, even when I was in Virginia. and a lot of those friendships still remain. And so that helped that I wasn't solely relying on that, but I did miss the brotherhood, so to speak. And I did just have that challenge. And I think I really missed kind of the action of trying to just get better at something. Of course, I turned that into developing my craft as a speaker, but it's kind of different. And my wife, she, doesn't always understand. I'm like, I got to do something physical. I need an outlet. I got to go kick something in the ass. And I miss that. And I miss being around the guys for sure.
Have you heard of Sebastian Junger's book, Tribe? Have you read that book before or heard of that?
I haven't read it, but I've heard about it. It's like I'm a serial book starter. So like I should probably finish some of the books, but that should be on my list. I've heard it's a good book.
So in case folks aren't familiar with him, he was a journalist that I think was stationed with the army in Afghanistan. And I think there's a documentary called Restrepo that is about him and about that platoon. And he wrote this book called Tribe. And in that book, he argues that the military and being in combat and being in war produces like a heightened level of community and belonging and purpose and brotherhood. And it kind of taps into this biological root that we have as tribal beings of being part of a much smaller community than we live in today. And it just describes the experience of leaving that group that's, this heightened sense of purpose, this heightened sense of belonging, this heightened sense of focus, and then just suddenly not having that, and how painful and how difficult that transition can be for folks that leave the military.
No, I can totally see that. And I think, and to your point, I think us as humans, we attempt to find that tribe, right? Naturally, biologically, sometimes to our detriment when it's, aligned strictly kind of on a political basis, right? We it can create a toxic environment, I think. And one of the things that I thought was really, really helpful, where you and I first met at Heroic Public Speaking, is I had a chance to be with people that were so completely different. They thought and saw the world in a completely different manner than I did. And I felt like it was very useful for me to kind of be in that, right? For me to really learn a lot of new experiences and be around people that I normally wouldn't come into contact. And I kind of view that as critical and pivotal to your growth, right? And I feel like we've lost a lot of that. And I think COVID has kind of really kind of created the opportunity for us to kind of go to our bunkers, right? For us to be on social media, and it's bringing out a lot of the worst parts. But, there is a way to get a more meaningful tribe. Like you should seek a tribe. And, I feel like that's what we're kind of wired to do. I think it just has to be kind of healthy. And I think you should kind of diversify your portfolio a little bit when it comes to engaging and finding that tribe.
Is that friendships for you, or like how do you find that sense of belonging as a civilian? Like it seems more difficult.
Yeah, no, it is. And I just think it's like anything. You have friendships. I think, I don't think this is unique. I'm, pushing 50 years old, but, I think I've heard some kind of statistic. I'm probably going to butcher this. Like once you turn like you're in your 40s, like men don't seem to create a lot of new friends. And I think like I would be one of those people where I would be pretty limited in my outreach if it wasn't kind of for my wife to help things along. And if it wasn't for my kids playing sports, like I made a lot of friendships for my kid playing hockey. And that's where I would do a lot of my socializing, go on tournaments with him and hang out at the bar with the other dads. And, and so there's a lot of that. And again, when some of the mastermind groups that I'm a part of, with other speakers and coaches, that I there's a sense of fellowship right there. Because as I mentioned before, leaving the military, I still had that tribe, right? And I still talk to those people, but they're not on the same journey as me. I'm on this path to go be a speaker, go, do this kind of stuff. And so I need people that can give me the support in that realm, in that sphere. And so I kind of, again, it requires me to kind of expand and to reach out and to grow relationships, in other areas.
I feel like part of being successful as a SEAL is having that singular focus and almost kind of building your identity and your being around around being excellent at this thing. And it seems like, coming out of the military, it's not only finding community and friendships, but it's also like redefining your identity that is such a difficult task. I wonder what advice you would give to someone who's maybe leaving the military or leaving the SEALs teams to find their second career. Like, what would you say to them?
It's exactly, well, when I'm a firm believer in one crafting their personal philosophy about, and it's not about the job you do. Like it's easy for me to say being a SEAL was so much wrapped up in my identity, and it was to an extent. But again, as I mentioned, one of the things that I'm happy that I was able to carve out for myself was kind of a separate identity, right? And you see this when I work with young athletes. They have to deal with the fact that their sport is going to end. If it may be for the season because of an injury. It may be eventually they get out of high school and they love the sport, but they're just not good enough to play at the next level, right? Which is a lot of kids, right? In terms of college. And so it's important that I help them work out that they're more than just their sport, right? And it's the same thing when I did a program a couple of months ago for an organization, and they completely upset the apple cart, and it was kind of in the tech space. And they're like, well, we got hired to do this job, and now you're trying to tell us to do something else. My identity is wrapped up in doing this specific job in which I was hired for. And it's like, no, you've got to develop a personal philosophy that's, who you are, what you stand for, right? And how you impact the environment around you. You've got to kind of develop that for yourself, because regardless, if you develop that personal philosophy that's about more than what you're just doing, then you're going to find a way to have purpose and value in any of your pursuits.
What made you get passionate about leadership? Because that seems like a focus for you in the military, and especially now, is leadership. What sparked that passion for you?
Well, I think, one of the things I always, not to go down a rabbit hole, but I kind of introduced myself as Master Chief, right, as my rank. And it's not because like I don't need to be called that. Like I don't go around like call me by my military title, but it's a fact that like everybody knows who an admiral is, everybody knows who a general, a colonel is, right? But nobody knows what a Master Chief is. And so I'm like, I want to make people understand that even in the enlisted, I joined the Navy when I was 18. And even at boot camp, I was the laundry petty officer. I was in charge of the laundry at boot camp. That was my high level of responsibility, right? It doesn't matter like where you come in the military, you learn leadership from day one. And so by the time you get to your like the actual significant positions of leadership, in the SEAL teams, it was me. It was a leading petty officer, a team leader. It was a platoon chief, a troop chief. There's different titles. I felt well equipped. I didn't have all the answers, and there was definitely mentoring and coaching that was needed to make me better. And I screwed up a lot of it. But fundamentally, I was given the tools to succeed. And what I see in the business world often is, people aren't given those tools. It's like, hey, you have a swath of people that you may, as an organizational leader, identify as an emerging leader or a new leader. And you're like, I identify them because they're good at their particular craft, right? They're a good sales rep, so they're going to be a good sales manager. They're good at this, so they're going to be able to lead that. When in reality, that's not always the case. And so you end up flushing a lot of people, or a lot of people head to the exit door themselves because they don't feel like they're comfortable. They don't want to be leaders or managers because we've never set the table for them to be so. We've never given them intentional leadership development. And so I like to come in and say, hey, if you just do a few kind of simple things, if you just put a basic level of investment into developing young leaders or new leaders, then it's really going to pay off. And, some of those people may leave, but at the end of the day, you're going to attract people when you're known to be good leaders. When you're at Johnson & Johnson or Enterprise rental car, known for their leadership development, people will go there just for that. And you're going to end up keeping a lot of those good people if you just commit to investing in leadership.
You talked about creating or shaping a separate identity from being a SEAL. I wonder what leadership principles or ways that they talk about team effectiveness. Where do you differ from the Navy or maybe the SEALs on leadership principles or team effectiveness?
I think I had a leadership journey, right? I think the military, there is this kind of stigma in the military, right? That is, you can just tell everybody what to do because you have a rank on your collar and they just got to follow like robots. Okay, they got to listen to you because you're in charge. Okay, got it. But isn't that kind of the same in every organization? Don't you fundamentally have to listen to your boss? In
Right.
reality, though, if you want to extract maximal performance from the people within your sphere of influence, you better find a way to inspire and persuade them. And it ain't about just yelling at them and telling them they got to do what you say because you're in charge. You got to find a way to connect with people. You got to find a way to kind of know what makes them tick at an individual level. And you got to be intentional with, it's that situational leadership. You got to give people the right tool. I always tell people, is there a time to yell at somebody that works for you in the military? You're damn right there is. But you're going to do it because it's a tool you've decided to use in that particular moment because you think that tool is what's going to help, affect the behavioral change in that situation, right? It's not because it's your default. Well, there were times when it became my default. I tell the story, in a lot of cases, there's two different instances. One, when I was an instructor at close quarter combats, right, where you go through these doors and you clear, like in the movies, the SWAT team, you're shooting like just inches away from one another, and it's very dangerous and it's stressful. And in training, we intentionally, as an instructor, we inject as much stress into that situation as possible because it's the closest we can find to replicate combat. And I remember one time I'm yelling at this kid, right, and he's not getting it, and he just turns and looks at me, and like it was like if there's a textbook definition, right, of overwhelm and a picture associated with it, it would be him. And I'm like, look, whatever you're doing right now, it's not working. Like he may not be suited. Like we flush people out of the SEAL teams all the time. He may not be suited, but it's your absolute utmost responsibility to make sure that you're giving him the utmost in terms of coaching and quality of instruction to make sure that he gets the point across. And so it really, from that day, I started to alter. I started, being less of a dick when I'm trying to instruct people. Try to convey stress as a tool, right? And the other thing is, in another situation, I remember we were training to go to Iraq, and we were doing urban warfare training, and again, more close quarter assault type training. And, the fun stuff is you go through, you clear these buildings at a high rate of speed, shoot the bad guys, cuff up the people that, you're going to take under control. And when you're done all that, you have to process the scene almost like an FBI type thing where you pull equipment out of people's pockets and you label it. You label the buildings and the rooms and the floors. And guys would start to slack off on that. And so I remember just screaming at dudes because they weren't doing the basic shit that they needed to do. The problem is I had done that a little bit too much before that. And so guys started to tune me out. And I remember just kind of looking at this dude after I'm yelling at him and dressing him down. And he's just like, yeah, he just had that face like whatever. Like it wasn't effective. And so again, I had to be like, well, I got to be more cognizant, more conscious, more deliberate with how I try to change a behavior. Like I can't be out of frustration that I'm yelling at somebody because that's not going to be what is effective. I've got to have the situational awareness and emotional control to do something very deliberate that gets what I need to get done, furthers my objectives.
You talked about that individual that might not make it. What do you think separates the people that make it, that pass SEAL training, that pass, but like, what separates the people that make it, would you say?
Well, people often, there's a mythology that SEALs are some kind of superhuman performers or whatever. And really we're ordinary people, with an extremely high level of commitment and dedication to the task, right? And again, at the cost of sometimes our family lives, often at the cost of our family lives, is we're singularly focused and we're not going to quit and we're just going to go at it, right? But there's no, but that's the mental thing. That's the commitment. And with that, of course, there's the physical. You have to be physically fit. Now, you can make it through that 6-month selection assessment program. You can make it through the next 6 months of follow-on training. So it's a year plus before you even show up to your very first SEAL team. A year plus because your boot camp, buds, SEAL qualification training. When you show up there and you start moving with the experienced guys at a faster, at a higher rate of speed, some people just can't seem to get it together. And so I don't. And so again, it's the interventions that can be made, as I know more about it now, is helping them, giving them some performance psychology skills that can help them like maintain their composure, maintain their focus. It's quality of training. But at the end of the day, it's like you can only, when you're training a whole bunch of guys to go through dangerous training, you can only cater to the individual so much. It's like, look, it's at a certain point, this train's leaving the station. You're either getting on and picking it up, or we got to find somebody else who can do the job.
It seems to me you need a high level of commitment and dedication to get through, SEAL training, but also to really achieve anything great in life. I wonder what you think. Like, is that something that you're born with, or like, can you grow that, or like how come some people have dedication and commitment and other people don't?
I mean, there's so many facets that come into play. But I would say, especially right now, when I talk to business people, whether it's executives, whether it's salespeople, I get the sense that they're very busy, right? Are you getting busy though, or are you getting better? And in many cases, it's just they don't understand. Like, they don't understand, well, this thing is helping me. This thing is hindering my ability to communicate effectively with the people that work for me, right? I'm so focused on this one thing that I'm not picking up what's going on in my environment and switching gears to address that. I am not fully present in front of my customer, right? When I go and have a sales conversation, I'm so focused on the agenda that I want to vomit forth, right? That I'm not really aware of how I can actually solve a problem for them in that moment, which may be completely different than the agenda that I brought in. So at the end of the day, I need to keep the long goal in mind, the long game in mind, and I need to grow and develop a relationship. And so that's a lot of it. A lot of it is just, you need to be more deliberate. You need to be more intentional. You need to think of, like, and I always, as cheesy as this sounds, I try to, and I don't always tell people I'm doing this, but like, if you have something like, I tell people to envision, what are the most critical points of execution? What are the things that stress you out the most? What are the things that you need to be at your best? Those moments, right? Where, like, and I call it being on the X. In those moments, you successfully executing that, what does that look like? And then we back build that to say, all right, what skills, what knowledge, what attributes, which mental performance, preparation, techniques, and skills do we need to advance for you to be exactly what you need to be in those moments? Because if you're able to do that, in those high stakes, high consequence moments, and you gear your preparation to that, everything else becomes more seamless. Everything else is, the routine things happen at an easier level because of where you've benchmarked your performance and your development.
That's awesome. It seems like also bouncing back is super important, because we all get hit from time to time. And maybe the idea of resiliency, is that something?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like some people have it and some people don't. Like, I wonder, is that something you can build? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, people have certain traits. People have certain attributes, where you're going to, in a certain situation, you have a strength and a certain attribute. And a good friend of mine, he wrote a book called about the attributes. Rich Diviney, another fellow SEAL, great book. He talks about how in the different areas you have strength in some attributes, right? You may be highly adaptable in this situation, yet you may have difficulty executing sequences in another situation, right? But you can develop that. In fact, when we did we developed what we call the Warrior Toughness Program for the Navy. Right, got to get our sailors and officers tougher in the face of the enemy, but in the face of the challenges of military life. And we would brief like congressmen, senators, generals, admirals, and then a lot of the questions were like, was this some kind of resilience training? And we would define it as, I would say, you can be resilient but not tough, but you can't be tough and not resilient. And so what I mean by that is we defined toughness in three ways. Right. The first is your ability to take a hit and keep going. Right. In a combat situation, it's to see your friends get wounded. You're injured. You're not at your best, but you're going to get back up. You're going to get back in the fight. Right. It's the same thing as if you've taken a hit in your career, if you've suffered loss in a relationship. And that's the resilience piece. It's being able to get back into the fight, but it's also being able to perform under pressure. Is for you to be able to arrive at that situation and be able to perform. And lastly, it's your ability to deal with the day in, day out grind. Because the problem with just resilience, And the classic definition, it's controversial, is people will say, hey, resilience means I'm going to bounce back after adversity, right? Good for you. But what I need you to do is be effective in the first place. I don't care how good you are when you bounce back if you sucked in the first place. That doesn't do me any good. I need you to be capable to perform at a high level in the first place. And then when you suffer that adversity, then we need to get you back to there. And in the next steps, we need to get you even at a higher level of capability.
What do you think about box breathing?
Yeah, so that was another core component of the warrior toughness training. And it's actually something that I will do in my workshops, sometimes my keynotes even.
For folks that don't know what it is, could you explain it?
Yeah, so when we look at it like there's a couple of different ways you can use this. And I'm a big believer in another aspect of the training is mindfulness or meditation, mindfulness training. And the reasons that we used it, mindfulness training, is to help focus in the face of distractions, also to help regulate the emotions. And typically almost every time for most programs, they'll start you off with breathing. And breathing is the one way for you to be present. And being mindful is your ability to be in the present, to be not thinking about what happened yesterday, not thinking about what's going on tomorrow, but for you to be present and focused in the future. And when you focus on your breathing, that's one easy way to do it, because I can't breathe yet for yesterday. I can't breathe for tomorrow. But when you start to get angry, when you start to get frustrated, scared, there's that reptile part of your brain known as the amygdala, which it takes only like one of 30 billion nerves to fire it up. And when it fires up, you can get into that red zone, as we call it, where you lose your ability to think critically, you lose your fine motor skills, you say the things in an argument that you regret. And so when you breathe, when you get into that moment and you start to feel really flustered, you can do long, slow, deep breathing to lower that arousal. And so the prescription that I use when I teach it is I say, all right, we're going to inhale diaphragmatically. We're going to inhale through our nose, filling our diaphragms. We're going to inhale for 5 seconds. Then I'm going to hold it and pause for 2 seconds. And then I'm going to exhale for 6 seconds, pause for 2, and repeat. And then when we do that, we'll also incorporate some visualizations to also deal with the mindfulness component. But if you get in the habit of doing that and you use that the next time somebody cuts you off in traffic and you start to get really amped up and you have that at the front of mind to start breathing, to lower that energy, lower that arousal, you're going to be able to do that. The more you practice it, the more you're going to be able to use it in every kind of stressful situation in your professional and your personal life.
And you've seen that work for you, because I think some folks that maybe haven't done that before, they're like, I breathe all the time. Why would I need to breathe? I'm stressed. I need to take action. So you feel like, though, the breathing can make a difference. Right.
And so it's one of the core things that we would teach Navy recruits, and we called it Recalibrate, because when you do military training, and part of stress inoculation and testing capability is you want to push them to the edge of the cliff. Right. But if you push them over the cliff, right, and to where they're completely overwhelmed and they can't function, they're not getting anything out of that. So when you give somebody stressful training simulations, you need to have the adaptation take place. Otherwise, you're not really doing much. And so when we get to that point where we see the recruits, they start to kind of lose their focus. That amygdala fires up. They become overwhelmed and training value is lost. We pull them aside. And some people would cynically say is we're letting them take a knee. Letting them have a timeout. But really what we're teaching them is how to learn how to cope with that stress. And so when we say recalibrate, that recruit would know to go through that breathing. In a lot of cases, you'll hear that old cliche, take a deep breath. Well, if you just take a deep breath, it floods more oxygen into your brain and heightens that fight, flight, or freeze response. Whereas if you do a long, slow, deep breath, then you start to lower that arousal. And then you'll find when we would have the recruits say, do something stressful like firefighter training, we would say, all right, recalibrate. You've lost the bubble here. You're overwhelmed. And then as they start to calm down, we revisit the points of performance of the sequences, the techniques, procedures they're going to have to execute to be successful. And then we push them back in. 9 times out of 10, they're successful now. And we haven't given them the easy route, because the next time they're on the ship and it's for real, and there's a fire, two ships collided, as they start getting stressed, it's a habit for them to start to regulate that breathing, and then they can start being focused on what they need to do in that moment to be successful ultimately.
That's awesome. You said that it's 5 seconds in, 2 second pause, 6 seconds out, 2 second pause. What's the reason for the 6 seconds out versus 5 seconds in? Is there a
You want it to be a little bit, you want it to be a little bit longer of an exhalation than it is for inhalation. But I want to be very clear. That's my prescription, because I got to give you something. Actually, in the Navy, it was like we would do 6 seconds in and 7 seconds out. And I found for most of the people that to be a little bit too long. But ultimately, what's important is for you to that's just getting it started. And so what I actually tell people after that, after you get kind of used to that, don't worry about the length of the breathing. So when I breathe, I don't count. I don't count how long it takes me, because sometimes I'm going to be more relaxed and I'm going to be able to breathe for longer, my inhalation. The point is that it's long and slow. And so what I do prescribe is to get in the habit of it, for you to do like 3 sets of 10. So for you to try to stay focused on your breathing. And so you count every exhalation breath. So count every exhalation breath to 10. Start back over at 1. If you completely lose focus, start back at 1 and try to get to where you can stay focused and engaged for 3 sets of 10. And that starts to also work the mindfulness component. All right. As you start to get distracted and you catch yourself and you bring that attention back, you're strengthening that frontal cortex through mindfulness training, while you're also building the habit of learning how to breathe and using that as a tool for stressful situations.
Is the longer exhalation intentional over the inhalation? Like, is that like an intentional thing?
It is. And I don't I am at the limits of the physiological scientific explanation. That's just kind of what I've been taught. But all I know, again, because I don't really worry, I just make, because it's easier to exhale, right? You can exhale slower than you can inhale. So, and I think that's just one more way, because it's easier to control the exhalation. That's one more way that I can force myself to slow down.
I'm a little bit of a nerd on this stuff, so I'll fill in the blank a little bit. I was trying to map it with what I know about some breathwork stuff, and what I've learned is that the longer exhalation in ratio with the inhalation can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which can help regulate stress and relaxation and help balance the overall nervous system, which then can work with the amygdala, like you mentioned, and reduce fight or flight response. And so there's like specific studies, to my knowledge, on changing that ratio of inhalation to exhalation and increasing the amount of exhalation. And I think the physiological has something to do with like CO2 release. I don't know. That's the edges of my understanding.
Well, again, how I've always been taught is if you're focusing on the inhalation, you're flooding the oxygen to the brain, and when you deliberately exhale at a slower rate, you're slowing that process down. But your explanation sounds much cooler. So
well, I mean, that's what you see when you see somebody get panicked. You see them, they're breathing in a lot and fast and shallow. And when somebody's relaxed, that's not what they're doing. They've got slower breath, they've got deeper breath, like from the diaphragm, like you said. And I think that like a big insight for me, and it's awesome that the military teaches this. A big insight for me is that yes, my breathing changes because I'm stressed, but then the breathing itself can cause more stress and push me over that edge, like he talked about, and put me into panic mode. And being able to recover from that can be controlling the body, which is easier to control in my experience than the mind. And then that can in turn bring back the mind.
Well, and it goes to, again, I go back to when I'm in the habit of focusing on my breath. Like when I'm running and gunning on the streets of Iraq, I'm not like, okay, inhale for 5 seconds. Like I can't do that. Right. But what I can do is when I'm running, all of a sudden I'm like, I'm about to go around this corner. It's like, all right, breathing. Okay. Cause when I'm breathing, I know if I'm focusing on my breathing, I'm focusing less about consequences, right? I'm in the moment. And so, yeah, it may be thinking ahead in terms of tactics, but I am not occupying my headspace with the consequences of what happens if I get shot, what happens if I don't make it home, if I make a bad decision, right? I'm focusing on the things that serve me, and breathing's a way to kind of bring that back to where, all right, the here and now, as well as, and it starts, we used to do, I went through sniper school in 1999, very like difficult course. And it always goes back to, we would always run, like we would do these sprints, and then you got to get down behind your sniper rifle, and you got to try to lower that respiration, because if you don't get that breathing calmed down, then those crosshairs are going to be dancing all over the place. So again, even at the most basic level, you find a way to kind of control everything and slow things down when you can.
Well, there's still that theme that we've talked about several times now, which is building a skill to a level that it's second nature, to a level that you don't have to think about it, so that you can be present in these high pressure, high stakes situations.
Well, and again, that's right. And again, back to the mindfulness thing, what I found was when I was helping to create the Warrior Toughness program, a lot of the inspiration for me was where I felt short in my own personal life, right? I could be one person at work and calm, cool, composed when I needed to, not always, but like generally. And then I'd get home and I'd lose my shit, right? Over the dumbest stuff. And so it was very critical to me that I'm like, all right, well, I need to be the same person in terms of like, me being in emotional control in a combat situation, is making good decisions, is really not that different than when I get home and I start to feel the stress of anger, or like something triggers me. I still have to have a focus on the objective. And the objective in that situation is not destroying, not creating problems with me in my relationships. And so it's the same thing. And when I started doing more mindfulness training, it's like you feel the symptoms. When I'm more present, when I'm more focused, I feel my face getting flushed when I get angry. I may feel my hands sweating when I get nervous. And when I feel that stuff, that's a tip. That's like a trigger for me to actually stop and label what's happening. And when I label it, I can somewhat emotionally disassociate myself from that and actually make a choice or a behavior that serves me.
I feel like in a way you've dedicated part of your life to like mastering your mind. Like I feel like becoming a SEAL, like I don't know what it's like, what it's like, but it seems to me as an outsider that that's a big component of success. And it seems like now that's a big component of your curriculum, of what you teach, of what you talk about, is mental mastery. Is that something that you had intrinsically, or is that something that you've worked to develop? Like how much of that did you start with?
So we didn't really start in the SEAL teams. I never had any of this training like early in my career. I had very little of it. Right. And so that also speaks to the fact where I could be one thing here and a complete train wreck other areas, because I'd never been deliberately taught it as a practice, as a discipline. And so intuitively you learn certain things in terms of like techniques to help you. Like, for example, I learn how to do self-talk when I'm going through situations where I need to maximum focus in the face of distractions. I talk my way through a procedure, right? To make sure that I'm using my equipment properly, that my hands are doing what my brain, they're moving as one. In terms of like, if I'm riding on a helicopter into an objective, I'm going through the contingencies. I'm mentally rehearsing the worst case scenarios. Okay, what happens if a helicopter gets shot out of the sky? What happens if we're patrolling onto the objective and we lose the element of surprise? I'm constantly mentally rehearsing that. And even later on as a leader, when we're doing training, I have to, like, if I am not tactically savvy and appearing competent in the tactics, I'm supposed to be the best one at it as a leader, then I don't have any credibility. People, I won't be respected. And so it was very important for me that I sit there and I focus, I concentrate, I mentally rehearse what I'm about to do before I walk into the door and go left, go right. I would always mentally rehearse that. But I learned that instinctively. Now we're much more deliberate about training it. And so we have a better product. And now we're using it at the basic Navy level as well. And so it becomes like we even have back in the SEAL teams, we have yoga rooms. We have guys have float tanks where they pipe in mindfulness stuff, and we have a mind gym in certain places. And so to your point, we've really realized like, hey, you're going to train your body, you need to train your brain as well. And that applies to everyone. Like we can all benefit from training our brains.
Is there a relationship for you between physical fitness and mental fitness?
Right. There's always a mind body connection with everything that we do. Right. And
Like
I
if I
always,
train my mind all the time, am I missing something? Like can I actually train my mind by training my body?
well,
What are your thoughts on
like,
that?
I think there should be like a 3-legged stool or a tripod, right? It should be body, mind, soul, right? I
Mhm.
don't care who you are, right? We don't all need to be CrossFit athletes or go run, a triathlon, but we need to have a level of physical fitness because we're going to be healthier. If we have a strong body, it's going to help our minds be stronger. And when I say body, I mean like the self-care in terms of making sure that we get enough sleep, making sure that we eat good food, making sure that we do basic physical fitness, because our mental endurance at that point will be cognitively sharper when we take better care of ourselves physically. Now, the soul part or the spirit part, again, it's not religious, but it goes into your kind of character piece, right? You've got to, and that goes back to kind of the philosophy. It's like who you are, what you stand for, how you're willing to positively shape your environment, those type of things, right? To make sure that that you have a clear picture of what your values are, how you see morals, right? And to make sure that you're able to say, okay, these actions, these steps that I'm taking, are they in alignment with who I say that I am? Right. And if not, then that's a problem. And so those three elements, and again, with the mental piece that we talked about, you got to put a lot of effort into that if you really want to be the best, right? If you really want to be as good as you can be.
There's got to be a physical component as well. What's the role of reflection for you? Like, and also, what's a after action report for us newbies here?
Yeah. So 27 years in the military. Obviously my military experience has shaped a lot of the things that I talk about, but I'm not one of those guys that says, well, in the military, we did it this way, you should do everything we do, because that's not a good fit. And sometimes, corporate does things better than the military, right? So I'm sensitive to that. But one area that I think we do well in the military in general is what we call the after action review process, which is our ability to kind of critically assess, analyze, and reflect on our experiences, right? And, after key milestone events in the military, like training exercises, maybe it's a 3-week training block that we went to go do down in Mississippi or whatever, or maybe it's after a combat operations, we'll compile like a very detailed document that starts the lowest level of leadership and operations all the way to the top. And we'll compile that. And that's the most extreme example. But we send 2 guys to clear a room to shoot targets. The whole thing takes 15 seconds. We still bring them out and we still talk about them. We debrief, we hot wash, we reflect on everything that we've done. And we constantly talk about it. And so we're very candid we're very ruthless sometimes in how we do that.
What's a hot wash?
It's what we call, like, so for example, you get done let's say we get done a combat operation, we do an assault, and we get back, we clean all our gear, and then we bring it in for the hot wash or debrief. So basically we're going through, it's not the official report that we're sending up. It's more about like the tactics. Okay. We had to, let's say we came in on the objective. We dropped off on trucks. We patrolled in. The trucks later came to support us and exfil us, and all those tiny little details that you wouldn't think, the unsexy stuff about organizations, about how our communications went, about how our after clearance procedures were. We've got to talk about that and always seek to refine it. And the good thing that I think many people don't realize is we're not just doing that after like the super, like when we failed stuff, like, because we don't need to keep being told not to put our hand on the hot stove, right? We're good about avoiding that. But I think oftentimes we're not as deliberate in the analysis and assessment of our successes, right? And so then we don't know, did we get lucky? Did this happen because of chance? And by the way, if we don't further develop this process, we're going to be outmaneuvered by our competition tomorrow, even if we can repeat the same results. So it's very critical to us that we have different methods that we use to reflect on our experiences, because we're only as good on our ability to develop and grow as we are to extract the value from our experiences. And sometimes that's about giving that to others, right? Sometimes it's about making sure that when you give feedback to people, that it's in the way in which they'll actually process it. Because in a lot of cases, you can get by with this in the military, but if I'm going to sit here and I'm going to give you feedback and it's going to be focused on the things that you did wrong, what the research says is that in the one hand, you may be even questioning my credibility in terms of my qualifications for giving you feedback. And in another case, you might completely see a different situation that I saw, because you may tend to misremember or understate your involvement of things going wrong. And so in those cases, it's about, all right, behavioral change. All right, I know that if I'm going to get you to do what I want you to do, I've got to address what I need you to do, not what you did wrong. And so we will talk about the things that you will get it all on the table, because we're not going to brush stuff under the rug, but I'm going to spend as much time enthusiastically talking about what we're going to do in the future, because that train of optimism, most people can get on board that. And if we focus forward facing and I give you succinct and actionable feedback, then that's the best key in terms of getting people to be productive.
This is where my mind's twisted. My mind immediately goes to the differences between like what's talked about in the hot wash and what goes into the official report. Like how does the tenor change between those two mediums? Like, and I wonder if like, or like they're kiss asses that come out, or like people like not telling the full truth, or like how brutally honest is it? And does that change between the hot wash and the official review?
Well, I mean, at a certain point, it's like, it depends on the severity of the mistakes. If there's a bunch of little mistakes here and there, or it's like, all right, we did something and, and it's like, all right, we're just going to fix this internally. Then, I mean, realistically, you're not going to go broadcast that out to everybody, and I think it's like, you're not going to air your dirty laundry for stuff. But I mean, if it's something significant, like, hey, we really screwed this up, and especially when it comes to supporting assets. If there is an issue with, say, communications with some of our fire support platforms, whether it's the drones, whether it's the gunships, whether it's the medevac platforms, whether it's like the armored unit that was going to support us, if there is issues with that interaction, then that is definitely something that we're going to want to highlight, right? Because at a certain point, it's our responsibility. If there's mistakes that we think that other people could make, even if it's in a different unit, then it's our responsibility to say, hey, you guys, you need to know about this so it doesn't happen to you. And we'll typically pass those out, right? Because a lot of times that needs to get back to the people who are training in the United States right now to take over for you in a few months. So we need to make sure that gets in there so they're better prepared for when they come into theater.
Do you feel like there's I think there is. Do you feel like there's a corporate application for that? I mean, we talked about evaluating success. I feel like the hot wash is maybe like a close thing that I feel like a lot of teams could do, both obviously in failure, but also in successes in an office, and go like, well, what did we do here that worked, or what did we do here that didn't work, and just be, totally honest about that, and without ego, and with as much as you can, without agenda or intention other than to really evaluate and reflect what could be better and what went well.
Well, and that's true. And that always comes down, and that's the function of a good leader, right? The leader has to model that we're in a safe area to be, candid with the mistakes we've made. And a lot of time that leader has to take responsibility. He or she has to model that, to say, yeah, this is where like I screwed up. Maybe I don't think I was clear enough in my intent. And so maybe that's why we fell short, whether that's, if that's the case or not. And I'm not just going to make stuff up, but we've got to know that, like, this is all about building better next time. All right. This is all about performance increases. And so I need to start making it clear that part of the culture is we're going to make certain mistakes. And it doesn't mean if you're way off the reservation, then yeah, there may be some consequences. But like, the example I always kind of use is, let the people experience as much tolerable failure as possible, right? I know it's a cliche we learn from failure, but I always say, hey, it's like a leader taught me. He's like, you have marksmanship targets, like, right, like a black bullseye on some square paper, and the 10X is the very middle part. That's like the perfect score. And as you graduate out to the score is lower and lower. But if you're still in that black, you're doing pretty damn good. And even in some of the white rings, yeah, okay. But if you're outside of that, now we have to have a conversation. Now we need to figure out how we can get you back into that. And so we need to let our people do that. We need to let them feel like they don't have to be so protective of what happens because of fear of mistakes. And I think, and this segues to something else that's really, really important. When I talk to the senior leaders, it's like, how are you gauging the ground truth in your organization? Because typically it's from relying on the leadership echelons 1 or 2 levels below them. Or that my people are going down and they're talking to the managers and they're talking to the people on the line. It's like, do you really think you're getting the unvarnished truth of what's happening and what their challenges are? I work with people and, sometimes and they're like, the leaders never talk to us. Right. Well, in the military, we have what we call battlefield circulations. You'll be in some remote area in Afghanistan, and the commander will do their best to hop on a helicopter with his or her staff and land and have like conversations with the junior folks on the ground to say, hey, what are your concerns? I need to hear it from you. Here's what I hear. And it's a two-way conversation. And with that, you're building, that's where the trust comes from. Because now you're like, all right, actually leadership is listening to what I have to say, and I trust them because of the reputation for them doing this. I trust them to share the things that I probably normally wouldn't. And so that's really kind of how you're able to, in establishing that rudimentary trust. So
I think you highlighted such an important leadership principle there too, which is you got to be able to model the behavior that you want to see in the folks on your team. And you got to be willing to do the things yourself to then build that kind of culture and environment for that behavior on your team. That's so important. Okay. I've got the heavy questions now to wrap us up. I got the heavy questions. We'll start with a semi-heavy one. Will war ever end?
No.
Why not?
You want some exposition on that, I'm assuming? Because it's again, you kind of alluded to a little bit of it is tribal, right? If you're going to ultimately, and you could also get the more, the existential, or not existential, but just the acceptance that there's evil in the world, right? And if for no other reason, or at least your tribe is going to view it as evil. If we look at some of the things that happen in the Middle East and, throwing people off of rooftops and torturing children and people of different, like if you're gonna have that, then there's no way people are always gonna do that. It's sadly it's in our nature. Like you're never gonna get rid of that. Like there's no such thing as utopian society. You don't think that like in the thousands of years we've been around, we would have figured it out if it were true. There's always going to be the people, the haves and the have-nots, and the people that have different, views that they just are not going to be able to reconcile. And so I always think it's like, hey, and I don't want to get into politics or anything. I think the world's a safer place when the United States is strong in our foreign policy, and obviously the domestic situation has to underpin that. But I think, people like to throw rocks at us a lot, but, they also rely on us too, in many cases. So again, that's a controversial statement, I understand, but that's what I believe. Doesn't mean I believe that we should make every intervention in every situation, but I feel we always need to come from a place of power and confidence.
Understood. What do you feel like you learned about death in combat?
That, it often doesn't matter how awesome you are, how hard you train. You do everything, it's the stoicism in me, right? You do what you're going to do, God willing, inshallah, fate permitting. You do what you're going to do, because you always have to have, as they say, that reserve clause that no matter what happens, I can't control it, right? I can't control when helicopters get shot out of the sky. I can't control when we lose the element of surprise on the way to the objective. I can't control who gets shot and when. I can only control my response to that, right? And we could all go anytime. And I think, you do your very best, I think, to come to terms with the fact that it could be you at any moment. And I mean, it could be any of us at any moment. We don't know. So it maybe pays to really spend some time reflecting on your own death, as morbid as that sounds,
Hmm.
to come to terms with it, I think.
Are you afraid of death?
I mean, I'm afraid of yeah, I'd say I am. Especially now when I have young kids. I think I am. I don't. I mean, I'm afraid of what I'll miss.
Hmm.
I'm afraid of the lack of guidance in their life. But but that's stuff I have to work. I have to work towards, right? I have to come to terms with the fact that there's people in their lives that will provide them the support if I'm gone. I can only be really deliberate about distilling the life lessons that I can and the guidance that I can while I'm still here, because I may not be here tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, there's the fear of things that I haven't done yet. But I'm getting better at accepting that, right? I've spent a lot more time reflecting on my own mortality, and so it's becoming increasingly more acceptance of that, because it's always like I had to accept it in the military, right? When you're going out, that you accept it, like, and I don't know, maybe it's easier because it's in that context. And now that I'm retired, I need to apply that similar approach.
That's what I was going to ask about. I think your answer may surprise folks because you're this guy that's been successful as a SEAL. It's been in combat. From an outsider and from my perspective, it seems like, well, those guys got to be fearless. They can't be afraid of death. And so I think your answer does surprise me.
Well, there's fear
Mm.
in combat, but it's not always the fear of death. And like, people think that death is the worst thing, and it's not necessarily in that moment. Now, if you're to sit there and really sit around a campfire and take some long, deep thoughts, then yes. But in the moment, like, my biggest fears, the times when I was the most scared in combat,
Mm.
were the times that I was worried about whether I was going to make a decision that was going to get people killed. And it was not about my own death, right? In
Mm.
many cases, you're more afraid of your reputation. You're more afraid of being thought a coward. Like, I go into a room where there's a good chance people are going to shoot at me and I could be killed, but I'm going to do it because I'm more afraid of what my reputation will suffer if I don't do my duty. But as a leader, it's you take on a higher level of stress and fear when it's not just your own life, right? Or not even if you don't, and it's not even like you get somebody killed. It's like you did something and it was not the right decision,
Mm.
and there's a like that. That's a stressor.
And that
Like,
has to
nice
do with
job, asshole, right? You do something stupid.
that has to do with reputation within the SEAL community, or what's the fear of reputation?
Yeah. Yeah. That peer
Mm.
pressure, they say peer pressure is a bad thing, right? Often, but in the cases, it gets people to do extraordinary things because they're worried about what their brothers think of them.
Mm. And what's the ideal? It's to be a warrior, or what's the ideal that you're striving for in reputation?
It's to be somebody that can be counted on,
Mm.
somebody that'll do for the people to the left and right of them and not just themselves, no matter what it takes, right? You have to, when you do something, when I go left down my wall, I count on the person to go right and cover my back. And without that level of trust and commitment, then you're just not going to be able to do things at a high level. And so there's a lesson there for the rest of us, right? It's not life or death, but in building strong teams, will people in that organization feel that the people around them will do for them? Will kind of, when they're smooth sailing, will they pick their heads up over their cubicles to check in with the people around them and see how they can kind of be of service and help and be of support? And the organizations that do that well, I think, are the organizations that flourish.
It seems to me you can do extraordinary things when you're a member of that kind of team and have that kind of trust amongst your brothers and sisters on that team. Outside of the military, or certainly in the military, it seems like that's a model that we could all strive for.
No, it is. And in a lot of cases, people they're gonna try to find those tribes. And I do a lot of like work in the sales environment. And a lot of the top salespeople, they'll have their tribe. And if the organization doesn't fit their tribe, they'll move their tribe somewhere else. That's why especially like in pharmaceutical sales, you'll see people like this. You'll see these core group of people jumping around together, or they start they start conglomerating and congealing in these different, they like, oh, this is a good company. They tell all their friends, and their friends get hired, right? And so the most effective organizations take those tribes and make sure that they gel and that they stay and they're productive and they're happy. That's what I see.
How do you build a tribe, or how do you build a community, would you say?
That's a complicated question. I suppose it always starts with, the organization, or me as the leader. I have to be very intentional with my marching orders. I have to say, okay, these are the organizations, these are organizations' values, these are the principles, but I got to make sure that I build those into, because so often it's just some shit we stick to a wall somewhere, or it goes out on a mass email. This is what we stand for, and this is what we're going to do. But like, you don't see that. Like somebody was telling me, we're the part of the number one rated company in our industry. Yet all the salespeople hate it, and I'm like, well, because you're talking about, like, you're in your office and you're talking about how great all the values are, yet the people on the line, the people in the field aren't seeing that. And so you've got to make sure that, like, if these are the values, I can't miss an opportunity to instill those into every conversation that we have, and every event that we have, and every training event that we have. And I need to give people the kind of guidance that they need. I need to be like, this is your left and right limits. Here's what I want you to do. Here is the legal constraints. Here's the ethical constraints. Here are the things that you just simply can't do. But I want you to succeed. I want you to understand how your actions, your behaviors, how they're aligned with the organizational direction, the organizational vision. And I think that you have to start there. Like, people have to know how they connect, right? And they have to be told. They have to be constantly getting their sense of purpose revalidated from their leaders. Because if you just think that they're going to go on autopilot and execute without like some serious support and conversations, then you're mistaken. And again, but that's back to the situational leadership piece. Like, you've got to recognize who you've hired, right? Am I hiring somebody right out of college who really needs some intrusive leadership and some skill and leadership skill and personal development? Or am I hiring somebody who's very senior and seasoned and experienced, and I really just need to plow a path and get the hell out of their way and push them the resources that they need to be successful, right? I support them. I give them what they need, but it's a completely different relationship. And if you try to treat and lead those two different kind of people in two different stages in their life and development the same way, you're gonna fall short in serving them up the leadership that they need.
That's so key, that the values on the wall actually being in the halls and in the field. You see that all the time in corporations, in my experience. It seems to me too, at least for me, the leader of a tribe or a community matters a lot, both in like creating the culture, but just in me wanting to be a member of it. Like, I look at the individual and the things that are important to that person and the trust I have in that individual, whether that's from competency or just who they are and what they represent and value in life. What do you think the role of a leader is in building a sense of community and tribe on a team?
Well, there's the organizational. I mean, the politically correct thing to say is that, yes, everything, like, this great CEO of this organization is driving this awesome culture, but people will also.
I want the politically incorrect answer.
I'm getting there. But at the end of the day, like, all of that could suck. But if you have the middle and below manager that is really providing like the fundamental top cover and creating a culture at that lower level of within that specific division of an organization, that can still work, that you can still thrive in that organization. But ultimately, if you don't provide an opportunity for the managers below you to push back and get some wins, if I'm constantly, and if people think this is about the military all the time, right? It's all top down. We drive everything top down. It's like, okay, I drive the intent top down, but the people at the lowest level, like, we go out on a combat operation. We're doing the mission planning. As a senior leader, I'm saying, all right, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at taking helos on this, or we're looking at doing a ground assault convoy, whatever that is, broad strokes. But then the team leaders, the breachers are talking about how they're going to get into the compound, into the structure. My snipers, my recce people, they're talking about, they're planning the route from the drop off from the helicopter, how the route we're going to get to the objective. My communications, my radio guys coming up with like the whole overarching communication plan for all of the different supporting assets. And so they're building that from the bottom up, meeting the overarching intent. And so it's the same thing. Like, I need to make sure that, like, hey, this thing is coming down. Does it have to be so rigid? Right? A lot of times, for example, like, you have a marketing team that will say, all right, well, we've come up with this awesome stuff. And because we've come up with it, you're going to use it. And the people on the ground are like, this is not friggin' working. This is not helping me. Just let me use the tools that you've created as I see fit. And when you have direction being forced down your throat, you've got to let your managers get some wins, right? You've got to let, like, when your people are like, this sucks, we're not happy, for like valid, right? Valid concerns. Then you got to be open to it. You got to be like, all right, so here's what we're hearing. This is why we have to do it this way. But hey, I'm listening to the concerns that you have. So we're going to try to make this adjustment, because I think you brought up some good points. You got to let your managers, like, be seen as somebody that can get some wins for their people. Otherwise, they just, like, if the manager is just a yes person, or if the manager has no power to influence the leadership levels above them, then that's not a functional organization, because you're not letting the people, the reality on the ground, drive the policies. That really has to happen, in my view. There has to be a level of bottom up influence into that policy, into that culture.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if there's room and value for autonomy in SEALs and the SEALs teams, there's got to be room in corporations where the stakes are much lower. Not that the stakes aren't high, but if there's room for it on a SEAL team and value for it on a SEAL team, I think there's got to be room and value for it in a corporation.
Well, it's like, it's back to the intent, people. And I'll keep it very succinct, but in the military, we have commander's intent. And, as simply put, it's the commander says, in this specific area, I want you to conduct an operation. At the conclusion of the operation, I want the conditions on the ground to be this. I want these specific results. Here are your left and right limits. Here's your constraints. Figure it out. And that has to be a lot of that in terms of creativity. Like, figure it out. Like, push us what resources you need. But you creatively decide how, because you're the one who's the most intimate with this problem set or this challenge. And so you tell us what you need, knowing that, hey, you got to stay within this box.
All right. Last big question. What's the meaning of life?
Man, I don't know. I'm always, I've done so many podcasts, but I always suck at the last question for whatever reason.
I think you'll have a good answer here.
I say this, I've said it before. I never miss an opportunity to celebrate the success of the people around you, and don't miss an opportunity to provide value, even if it's in some small way.
So provide value to others and celebrate others.
Yeah. There's a lot more.
And that's
a lot more, but that value includes, love and development and guidance and fellowship.
But those things bring a lot of meaning.
To me.
In my experience too. Okay. Thanks for doing this, man. This is awesome.
That's fun. Good conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So if folks want to get in touch with you, if they want to hear you speak, if they want to work with you one-on-one, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, you hit me up on my website or my email address, steve@stevendrum.com. It's steve at stephendrum.com. And I'd be happy to have a conversation about leadership or mental performance or getting you unstuck.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jered.